There are books that inform, books that entertain, and then there are books that quietly reach into your life, grab you by the soul, and ask, are you truly living the way you're meant to live? Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai, is one of those rare works. And here at the Book Digest, we open its pages not just to summarize it, but to experience it the way Yamamoto Tsunetomo intended: raw, fearless, and transformative. The first thing you notice about Hagakure isn't the clash of swords or the legendary tales of samurai. It's the silence beneath the words, the kind of silence that carries weight, conviction, and an almost unsettling honesty. Tsunetomo didn't write this book for applause or admiration. He wrote it because he saw a world losing its backbone, warriors losing their fire, and people drifting through life without purpose. He feared the samurai spirit was withering. So he poured everything he knew into these teachings, hoping to preserve a flame powerful enough to outlive him. And centuries later, that flame still burns. You feel it in every line, every anecdote, every sharp reminder that life without discipline collapses into chaos, and life without purpose dissolves into emptiness. You feel it in the way Tsunetomo speaks of loyalty, not as a duty, but as a lifeline. You feel it when he describes death, not to glorify it, but to free you from the fear that quietly dominates modern life. Because Hagakure isn't a book about dying. It's a book about how to live fully, fiercely, and without hesitation. Imagine waking up every day with absolute clarity. No doubt, no hositasuchen, no fragmentation between who you want to be and how you actually behave. That was the samurai ideal, and that is the core of Hagakure. Tsunetomo believed that if you live with death constantly in your awareness, not morbidly, but clearly, you stop wasting time. You stop delaying decisions. You stop drowning in what-ifs. You live with a kind of sharpness that most people today never experience. And in that sharpness, you find something that feels rare in the modern world: inner freedom. He wasn't lecturing soldiers on the battlefield. He was speaking to humans lost in their own fears, distractions, and self-imposed limitations. People just like us. The samurai path, as described in this book, is a metaphor for a life lived with intention. It is a reminder that courage is a habit, discipline is a lifestyle, and loyalty to a purpose, to a vision, to your own values, is what gives life its weight and meaning. The more you dive into Hagakure, the more you realize it's not about war. It's about mastering yourself. It's about stripping away excuses. It's about choosing action over hesitation, purpose over comfort, and clarity over confusion. In a world where comfort seduces and distractions dominate, Tsunetomo's words hit like cold water on the face. They wake you up. They challenge you. They demand that you examine your character with honesty. And once you see yourself clearly, you can no longer hide behind the illusions you built. He writes about sincerity being more powerful than cleverness. He writes about courage being a daily practice, not an occasional act. He writes about humility being a warrior's true ornament. He writes about honor as something forged in small moments, not grand gestures. Every teaching in Hagakure pulls you toward a life where your actions mean something, where you don't drift, where you don't compromise your values, where you live so fully that the fear of death loses its grip. And once that fear dissolves, everything else becomes clear. The samurai did not fear death because they knew death was inevitable, but they feared living without honor, without commitment, without purpose. That, to them, was the true tragedy. And in many ways, that message feels even more urgent today than it did centuries ago. This is not a call to seek danger. It's a call to stop sleepwalking through your own life. Hagakure invites you to ask yourself, are you living with intention or reacting out of habit? Are you making decisions or letting fear decide for you? Are you serving a purpose greater than your own comfort? Are you building character or just building routine? The samurai found meaning in devotion. We find meaning when we pursue something bigger than ourselves. Tsunetomo's teachings bridge the two. The beauty of Hagakure is that it gives you permission to reclaim your intensity. It reminds you that you are allowed to live with passion. You are allowed to be disciplined. You are allowed to be loyal to your principles. You are allowed to be courageous, even when the world around you chooses convenience over conviction. And that is why Hagakure never feels old. It feels like a conversation, a whisper from the past telling you that greatness is not accidental. It is earned through clarity, commitment, and action. The samurai did not wait. They decided. They acted. They lived with a fire inside them. And Yamamoto Tsunetomo's message is simple. You can live that way too. Not with a sword, but with a purpose. Not on a battlefield, but in your daily decisions. Not through violence, but through disciplined self-mastery. In the end, Hagakure is a mirror. It shows you your potential, your weakness, your strength, your fears, and then asks, what will you choose now? Discipline is not something the samurai occasionally practiced. It was the core of their existence, the quiet force shaping every breath they took and every decision they made. To understand the samurai is to understand discipline not as a restriction, but as a lifelong companion, one that sharpens the mind, hardens the spirit, and clears the path from hesitation to action. When Yamamoto Tsunetomo spoke about discipline in Hagakure, he wasn't describing a set of rules in a training manual. He was reaching for something deeper, something internal and unshakable, something that turns an ordinary human being into a person of clarity, resolve, and unbreakable will. The samurai did not wake up hoping to be disciplined. They built their lives so discipline became their natural state. For the samurai, discipline was the bridge between who they were and who they were meant to be. They knew human nature is soft, easily tempted by comfort, easily distracted by emotion, easily swayed by fear. But discipline was the fire in which these weaknesses were burned away. It transformed doubt into action, chaos into order, and potential into power. A samurai understood that without discipline, even talent becomes meaningless. A brilliant swordsman without discipline was just another man waiting to fall. A loyal warrior without discipline could break under pressure. A strong body without discipline was merely muscle wrapped around uncertainty. Discipline turns strength into direction and direction into destiny. This is why the samurai treated discipline not as punishment, but as freedom. Most people think freedom is the ability to do anything they want. The samurai saw freedom differently. True freedom, for them, was the ability to control oneself completely. Mind, emotions, impulses, and reactions, so that nothing from the outside world could pull them off their chosen path. A samurai did not want to be at the mercy of fear, anger, laziness, pride, or doubt. They wanted the freedom to act with clarity even when the world trembled. That level of freedom requires discipline so deep that it almost becomes instinct. Their discipline started from the moment they opened their eyes. Before the world could touch their mind, they grounded themselves in purpose. They rose early not because someone forced them to, but because they believed beginning the day before others was a sign of commitment. A samurai did not roll out of bed casually. Rising early was an act of respect toward the day, toward their duties, toward their lord, and toward themselves. Every morning reinforced their identity. I am a warrior. I do not waste the time given to me. Training was constant, but it wasn't training for the sake of skill alone. The sword was a tool for shaping the mind far more than shaping the body. Every swing demanded focus. Every stance demanded balance. Every repetition demanded patience. And it was patience, more than strength, that forged the disciplined soul. A samurai practiced the same moves countless times, not because they enjoyed repetition, but because mastery lies on the far side of monotony. Discipline taught them that boredom is not a wall. It is a door. Those who lack discipline turn back when boredom appears. The samurai broke through it. But this discipline did not belong only to physical training. Tsunetomo insisted that a samurai must cultivate inner discipline just as fiercely. Controlling emotions was not a matter of suppressing them, but understanding their nature. Anger clouds judgment. Fear freezes action. Desire distorts clarity. Pride blinds awareness. The samurai trained not only their bodies, but their reactions, so that in moments of crisis they remained steady. A samurai who cannot control his emotions cannot control his sword. A samurai who cannot control his thoughts cannot control his fate. Self-control extended to small things, because the samurai understood that discipline collapses when it is selective. If one becomes careless in small tasks, they become vulnerable in large ones. If one makes excuses in routine matters, those excuses multiply during critical decisions. This is why even simple behaviors, how to sit, how to walk, how to speak, how to eat, were governed by discipline. Not rigidity for its own sake, but deliberate refinement of awareness. When discipline flows into everyday actions, it becomes your nature instead of your battle. In Hagakure, Tsunetomo repeatedly emphasized that discipline is not something you display. It is something you embody. A person who merely acts disciplined when watched is weak at the core, because their discipline depends on circumstances. True discipline persists when no one is watching. It is the commitment you honor when the world offers you an easier option. It is the promise you keep when no reward is guaranteed. It is the standard you maintain even when no one else would fault you for lowering it. A samurai's discipline was measured not by public performance, but by private integrity. One of the most striking aspects of samurai discipline was its relationship with death. By meditating on death daily, the samurai stripped fear from their decision-making. Fear is the greatest enemy of discipline because it pushes people to abandon their principles to avoid discomfort or danger. But a samurai who accepts death as inevitable becomes immune to these temptations. Once the fear of death dissolves, all other fears shrink into insignificance. This mindset did not make the samurai reckless. It made them unstoppable. Discipline anchored them in purpose, while acceptance of death liberated them from fear. Together, these forces created a clarity unmatched by any other warrior culture. Tsunetomo often described discipline as a path walked with devotion. Not devotion to the sword, nor to violence, but to a code of living that demanded excellence in character. A samurai was expected to remain loyal, sincere, humble, and courageous, and none of these virtues survive without discipline. Loyalty requires discipline to endure hardship. Sincerity requires discipline to resist falsehood. Humility requires discipline to master ego. Courage requires discipline to act despite fear. Discipline is the mother of all virtues because it nourishes them, protects them, and turns them into lasting qualities rather than temporary moods. The samurai also believed discipline must be practiced when life is peaceful, so that it does not collapse when life is chaotic. When times are easy, most people relax, drift, and forget their edge. But the samurai sharpened their discipline during calm days precisely because storms always come. And when they do, it is too late to prepare. For a disciplined soul, crisis is not a disruption. It is simply another moment to act with clarity. This is why the samurai aimed to be most disciplined when life was most ordinary. Maintenance of spirit was a daily duty, not an occasional ritual. Another profound aspect of samurai discipline was their relationship with simplicity. They believed simplicity clears the mind and complexity clutters it. A samurai's room was minimalist, their routines were consistent, their possessions limited. This wasn't aesthetic, it was psychological. The fewer distractions in the environment, the more discipline can root itself in the mind. A disciplined life is not filled with noise, it is grounded in clarity. This clarity allowed the samurai to respond to challenges instantly because nothing inside them was tangled. Discipline also governed how the samurai handled failure. Instead of being crushed by mistakes, they viewed them as mirrors. Failure reflected weaknesses that needed attention. Instead of hiding from errors, the samurai dissected them with honesty. That honesty itself required discipline, because the easiest path for human beings is to avoid uncomfortable truths. But the samurai prefer discomfort that leads to growth over comfort that leads to decay. When a samurai stumbled, discipline lifted him back up. When he failed, discipline guided him to refine his spirit. When he felt doubt, discipline reminded him of his purpose. Even loyalty, the defining feature of samurai life, was inseparable from discipline. Loyalty without discipline becomes emotional and unreliable. Loyalty anchored in discipline becomes unbreakable. A samurai served their lord not because of convenience, but because discipline tied their identity to their duty. They kept their word even when sacrifice was required. They protected their honor even when silence would have been easier. They endured hardship not because they enjoyed suffering, but because discipline taught them to hold their ground. Over time, discipline turned the samurai into individuals who acted not out of impulse, but out of principle. They did not respond to insults with rash anger, nor to praise with inflated ego. They remained steady, balanced, focused. This inner stillness was one of their greatest strengths. While others were pulled by emotion, peer pressure, or convenience, the disciplined samurai remained aligned with their values. This ability to stay unmoved by external forces gave them enormous psychological power. A disciplined mind is a fortress that cannot be invaded. Tsunetomo believed discipline should never be conditional. You do not practice discipline only when it is easy, or when convenient, or when others expect it. You practice it because it is who you are. A samurai's identity was not tied to rank, skill, or status. It was tied to the discipline they lived with. A poor samurai with discipline was more respectable than a wealthy samurai without it. In their world, character was the true measure of a warrior, and discipline was the root of character. But perhaps the most remarkable truth about samurai discipline is its relevance today. You do not need a sword to live with discipline. You do not need armor to walk this path. You do not need a battlefield to practice the mindset. Modern life is full of distractions, temptations, noise, and emotional storms. Discipline is the shield that keeps you aligned with your purpose. It is the inner voice that says, "Stay steady," when the world pulls you in 100 directions. It is the quiet force that allows you to build a meaningful life instead of a reactive one. Anyone can harness samurai discipline, waking with purpose, acting with intention, training the mind to remain calm, practicing commitment, choosing integrity, embracing simplicity, and refusing to let fear dictate the path. Discipline is not a destination. It is a daily act, a living practice, a silent agreement you make with yourself every morning. It is the art of choosing who you want to be and then living that choice consistently. The samurai believed that discipline shapes destiny. It shapes your habits, your decisions, your reactions, your opportunities, your character. And when it shapes your character, it shapes the life that flows from it. Discipline is the invisible backbone that supports greatness. It is the quiet companion that walks with you through every challenge. It is the unseen force that turns fleeting moments into lasting purpose. To live with discipline is to live with intention. To live with intention is to live with honor. And to live with honor is to walk the path the samurai respected most, a path not defined by violence or power, but by the strength of the inner self. When you embrace this kind of discipline, you discover what the samurai understood centuries ago, that a focused mind, a steady heart, and an unwavering spirit form the truest weapon a person can ever carry. To understand the samurai, you must first understand their relationship with death. Not the fear of it, not the avoidance of it, and certainly not the denial of it. What defined the samurai spirit was the willingness to look death directly in the eye every single day. Yamamoto Tsunetomo believed that a warrior who does not meditate on death daily is not truly alive, because only by accepting death can a person strip away the illusions that weaken their courage, dilute their purpose, and cloud their judgment. The samurai did not chase death, nor did they glorify destruction. What they sought was liberation, the kind of liberation that only becomes possible when the fear of death loses its grip on the heart. Fear is the most powerful force shaping human behavior, even when people pretend it isn't. It hides in the corners of everyday decisions, whispers doubts into the mind, and pushes individuals towards safety rather than growth. fear of failure, fear of humiliation, fear of loss, fear of pain, fear of uncertainty. Each of these fears is a small death of the spirit. But the root of all fears lies the greatest one, the fear of death. This single fear branches into everything else. It makes people cling to comfort, avoid risk, hesitate when they should act, and compromise when they should stand tall. Tsunetomo understood that a person cannot be truly free while still chained to the fear of losing their life. So the samurai confronted it, studied it, embraced it, and ultimately made peace with it. To accept death is not to be morbid. It is not to seek suffering. It is not to give up on living. What the samurai practiced was the complete opposite. By accepting death fully, they learned how to live fully. Because once you stop fearing the end of life, you stop wasting the moments within it. The samurai believe that life becomes meaningful when you understand its fragility. When you realize that tomorrow is not guaranteed, today becomes precious. When you realize that any moment could be the last, hesitation becomes meaningless. When you realize that death is inevitable, you focus on what truly matters. Acceptance of death sharpens life instead of dulling it. Tsunetomo taught that every morning, a samurai should imagine themselves dying in various ways: struck by an arrow, pierced by a spear, falling from a horse, consumed by fire, drowned in water. This was not an exercise in despair. It was an exercise in freedom. By imagining each possibility, the samurai mentally rehearsed the inevitability of death so it would no longer shock or control them. This practice prepared the mind for courage. When the possibility of death becomes familiar, fear no longer dominates the mind. And when fear no longer dominates, a kind of inner calm emerges, a calm that makes a warrior decisive, clear-eyed, and unconquerable. Most people live as if they will never die. They delay dreams, postpone decisions, avoid risks, and indulge in illusions of permanence. They assume there will always be more time, later, someday, eventually. But life is not guaranteed. The samurai understood that postponement is the first sign of a life wasted. Instead of waiting, they acted. Instead of planning endlessly, they moved. Instead of hesitating, they committed. They embraced responsibility with urgency because they knew each moment carried weight. Acceptance of death did not diminish their ambition. It amplified it. They saw time as a battlefield where every second mattered. The samurai fearlessly served their lords, families, and principles because their devotion was not compromised by fear of loss. They could act boldly because their mind were not clouded by the question, "What if I die?" That question destroys courage. It interrupts action. It paralyzes potential. But a samurai who has accepted death no longer asks it. Instead, they ask, "What is the right thing to do at this moment?" That clarity is liberation. It removes hesitation and replaces it with purpose. It transforms a fragile mind into a fortress. Accepting death also cultivated deep sincerity. When death becomes real, there is no room for deception or falsehood. Pretense feels wasteful. Pride feels shallow. Ego feels unnecessary. A samurai learned to speak honestly, live humbly, and act authentically because death stripped away the illusions of importance. When you know life is temporary, you stop performing for the world and start living for your values. But paradoxically, this sincerity made the samurai more respected and more influential. Their honesty was not the brittle honesty of ego, but the clear honesty of someone who has nothing to fear. Tsunetomo believed that accepting death brings inner peace. Humans often experience anxiety because they cling to life with desperate attachment. They crave control over outcomes, situations, and futures. But death is the ultimate reminder that control is limited. A samurai who embraces this truth stops fighting reality. They focus on what they can control, their actions, virtues, character, and conduct, and release what they cannot. This is why samurai were calm, even in chaos. When others panicked, the samurai stood grounded. When others froze, the samurai stepped forward. When others drowned in overthinking, the samurai moved with clarity. Acceptance of death was not surrender, it was mastery. This acceptance did not remove their love for life. It strengthened it. When you stop fearing the end, you start appreciating what you have. The samurai found beauty in small moments. A cup of tea, a quiet morning, the sound of rain on temple roofs, the presence of loyal friends. Their discipline made them notice life deeply, and their acceptance of death made them grateful for it. They treated every moment as irreplaceable, not because of anxiety, but because of reverence. A person who understands death understands life better than anyone. Accepting death also created unbreakable loyalty. A samurai who feared death was unreliable. They might flee, betray, or hesitate. But a samurai who accepted death became dependable to the core. They could stand by their lord even when others abandoned him. They could protect their family even when danger grew. They could uphold their code even when punishment loomed. Their loyalty was not emotional. It was forged in the certainty of mortality. Death could not threaten them into compromise because they had already accepted it. This made their loyalty pure, undiluted, and sacred. Tsunetomo described the samurai path as the way of immediacy. When a decision had to be made, it was better to choose quickly, wholeheartedly, and without second-guessing. The samurai believed that overthinking is a symptom of fearing consequences. But when you accept death, consequences lose their power to intimidate. A samurai acted with clean intention, unburdened by fear. This decisiveness made them effective leaders and powerful warriors. But beyond the battlefield, it made them powerful human beings. Decisions shape life, and indecision weakens it. Acceptance of death dissolves indecision by removing fear. In modern life, people struggle with anxiety, hesitation, and emotional paralysis not because they are weak, but because they have never learned to confront the reality of death. They avoid thinking about it, as if ignoring it will make it disappear. But avoidance only gives fear more power. The samurai faced death boldly, and in doing so, they took that power back. Accepting death is not about becoming reckless. It is about becoming fearless. It is about freeing yourself from unnecessary suffering. It is about living without constantly protecting your comfort. The samurai lived with a sense of urgency that made them impossible to manipulate. They knew that time was finite and that opportunities disappear. This understanding gave them a rare quality. They did not waste their life on petty conflicts, trivial concerns, or empty ambitions. They focused on what mattered. They lived in alignment with their values. They built character instead of chasing distractions. They prioritized integrity over convenience. This kind of clarity is only possible when a person understands how fragile life truly is. Accepting death also strengthens humility. When you realize you're immortal, pride becomes meaningless. The samurai bowed, often not out of weakness, but out of awareness. They respected others because they understood that everyone walks toward the same end. Mortality equalizes all humans. A samurai who accepted this truth moved through the world with grace. They were not arrogant. They were not boastful. Their humility was powerful, grounded in the wisdom that life is temporary and ego is pointless. But perhaps the greatest gift of accepting death is the deep sense of peace it brings. A samurai lived their life without regrets because they acted fully in each moment. They did not carry emotional baggage. They did not run from their responsibilities. They did not hide from difficult truths. Acceptance of death turned their life into a mirror of intention. Each day could be their last, so each day needed meaning. Each conversation carried weight. Each friendship carried sincerity. Each duty carried respect. When you live this way, peace becomes your constant companion. Tsunetomo said that the person who fears death will never be able to act with true loyalty or true courage. But the person who embraces death becomes unshakable. Death cannot intimidate them. Misfortune cannot defeat them. Pain cannot stop them. The samurai knew that fear destroys potential faster than any enemy. By accepting death, They freed themselves from fear's chains and walked through the world with a spirit that nothing could break. This liberation is available to anyone, not just warriors. You do not need a sword or armor to embrace this truth. You only need to acknowledge the fragility of life and let that awareness sharpen your days. When you stop pretending you have unlimited time, you begin to live with purpose. When you stop fearing the end, you begin to create without hesitation. When you stop avoiding discomfort, you begin to grow. Accepting death is the gateway to courage, clarity, resilience, sincerity, loyalty, and peace. The samurai accepted death to liberate the spirit. And in that liberation, they discovered something profound. That life, when lived without fear, becomes astonishingly complete. Loyalty, in the world described by Hagakure, was never a polite virtue or a hollow word that one sprinkled into speeches. It was the flame that burned at the center of a samurai's existence, the anchor that held him steady when the world tilted, the thread that tied his footsteps to meaning. Without loyalty, a samurai was not simply incomplete, he was nothing. His sword, his training, his courage, his discipline, all of it turned to smoke if the heart was not fastened to an unwavering pledge. But this loyalty was not the naive devotion of blind obedience. It was something far deeper, almost spiritual, a force that shaped identity itself. Because to the samurai, loyalty did not restrict freedom, it defined purpose. To understand why loyalty carried this immense weight, imagine living in a world where survival depended on more than just skill. A samurai walked through life aware that death might arrive without warning. In an era marked by shifting alliances, betrayal, and political turbulence, the only path to inner clarity was to bind oneself to a master so completely that personal desires dissolved into a singular direction. That bond was not a chain, it was a compass. It created a sense of direction so strong that even fear bowed to it. A samurai who knew where his allegiance lay never woke unsure of who he was or what his next step should be. Every action, every thought, every sacrifice radiated outward from that central vow. This is why Yamamoto Tsunetomo wrote with such intensity about the purity of loyalty. He understood that only a person who gives himself completely to something greater than his own comfort can experience a life without hesitation. To modern ears, such devotion may sound extreme, even dangerous. But in the context of the samurai ethos, it was the highest expression of freedom. When you remove doubt, self-interest, and ego, you remove the things that paralyze a person. A loyal samurai could step into danger with a calm mind because he had already chosen the meaning of his life. He did not have to weigh pros and cons or wonder how the world would judge him. His loyalty had already made that decision. And in that clarity, there was a kind of liberation. What makes loyalty such a powerful foundation for identity is its ability to strip away the illusion of fragmented priorities. Most people today are pulled in a dozen directions at once. Careers, ambitions, relationships, expectations, all compete for dominance, leaving a person mentally overcrowded. But the samurai believed that a person should not scatter their spirit into fragments. Strength came from unity, and unity came from unwavering devotion. When a samurai pledged loyalty, he gave not a piece of himself, but his entire self. His identity fused with his purpose, leaving no room for uncertainty. And when every choice emerges from a single, clear commitment, life becomes sharper and lighter. There is no wasted energy, no internal conflict, no dilutive. This loyalty also demanded consistency, not convenience. A samurai's devotion was not measured when things were peaceful and easy. Its true value appeared when loyalty was uncomfortable, risky, or painful. Anyone can remain loyal when it costs nothing. But a samurai's pledge was tested most fiercely when betrayal felt tempting, when survival seemed to require compromise, when others shifted their allegiances like leaves blown by the wind. In those moments, the samurai stood firm, not because he was stubborn, but because he believed a person without loyalty was a person without integrity. If your identity can be purchased, pressured, or persuaded into change, then it was never real to begin with. Loyalty, in its purest form, was the proof that a warrior's spirit was unbreakable. Tsunetomo often emphasized that loyalty must be absolute. Partial loyalty was indistinguishable from disloyalty. This extremity came from the belief that dual allegiances tear a person apart internally. If loyalty could be divided, it would eventually collapse under its own contradictions. A samurai could not serve two masters, nor could he serve himself and his lord at the same time. One path always had to lead, and the samurai chose his master with such finality that it became the defining element of his life. That, ironically, freed him from the anxiety of constantly renegotiating his place in the world. When loyalty is absolute, identity becomes unshakable. But loyalty to the samurai was not passive devotion. It was active, alert, and expressive. A loyal warrior did not wait for instructions or hide behind excuses. His loyalty made him responsible for anticipating needs, protecting honor, defending reputation, and stepping forward even when he had not been explicitly asked. This proactive loyalty demonstrated a deeper understanding. True devotion reveals itself through initiative. A master should never have to question a samurai's readiness. Loyalty meant living in a state of prepared service, of watchful commitment, where the warrior carried the burden of vigilance on his own shoulders. The master should feel supported not because of statements of loyalty, but because of actions that repeatedly confirmed it. This sense of active loyalty also shaped how samurai viewed failure. To fail the master was to fail one's own identity. The shame was not in the mistake itself, but in the disruption of the bond that defined the warrior's existence. This is why stories of samurai risking everything, even life, to restore loyalty after failure filled the culture. In a world where honor and identity were intertwined with devotion, redemption required proving that loyalty was more powerful than the consequences of the failure. A mistake could be forgiven, but disloyalty could not. The reason was simple. Skills can be rebuilt, but the trust that forms the core of identity is nearly impossible to mend once broken. Loyalty also shaped how samurai interacted with others. It taught them humility, restraint, and responsibility. A loyal person does not act recklessly because their actions reflect on the one they serve. They do not boast because their success is not theirs alone. They do not dishonor others because doing so would dishonor their master. In this way, loyalty became a moral discipline. It served as a behavioral compass that guided every interaction. A samurai had to be worthy of the trust placed in him, so loyalty elevated his character. It carved a pathway towards self-respect because fulfilling loyalty required becoming the kind of person who could bear such a noble burden. Even in its most extreme form, loyalty was not meant to numb the samurai's individuality. Rather, it refined it. Each warrior brought his own personality, strengths, and flaws into the bond, but the pledge gave those qualities a structure that made them meaningful. Like a sword that becomes valuable only after being forged in fire, a samurai's identity gained its sharpness through the act of giving himself to a purpose beyond self. The paradox was that surrender gave birth to individuality. You are most yourself when you devote yourself completely to something that anchors your spirit. Without that anchor, individuality becomes shapeless and drifts without direction. Tsunetomo also warned that loyalty should not be motivated by rewards or advancement. If you serve only to gain favor, power, or recognition, then your loyalty is a transaction. It is no different from a merchant's bargain. A samurai's loyalty was meant to endure even when it resulted in hardship or sacrifice. In fact, loyalty that lasted through suffering was considered the highest form of devotion. It demonstrated that the warrior's identity was built on principle, not convenience. Loyalty that bends under pressure is not loyalty. It is strategy. And strategy, while useful, cannot shape a noble spirit. Only devotion without conditions can do that. At its heart, loyalty also created community. When multiple warriors shared the same devotion to the same lord, they were bound to each other in ways that went deeper than camaraderie. They were not merely allies. They were extensions of each other's purpose. This shared loyalty created a powerful sense of unity, where every warrior felt responsible for the success and honor of the group. It erased individual rivalry and replaced it with collective strength. A samurai did not fight only for himself or even for his master. He fought for the brotherhood of loyalty that held them all together. The group became a living embodiment of devotion, a force that was stronger than any one warrior could ever be alone. But loyalty also came with weight. It demanded sacrifice. It required the courage to place someone's honor above your own comfort. It meant that a samurai might have to walk into danger, isolation, or misunderstanding for the sake of preserving the bond. And yet, this weight was not a burden. It was a privilege. To serve something worthy was to give your life a shape that loneliness could not penetrate. The samurai knew that suffering for loyalty was not tragedy. It was the fulfillment of purpose. What else could be more meaningful than to give everything for the one commitment that defined who you were? Perhaps the most powerful aspect of samurai loyalty was its permanence. In Hagakure, loyalty did not end with the master's death. The bond extended beyond life itself, because devotion that depended on life was not devotion, it was circumstance. True loyalty survived absence, silence, and the disappearance of the one being served. It turned memory into duty. It transformed legacy into responsibility. When a samurai continued to serve a deceased master's name, ideals, or family, he demonstrated that loyalty was not a contract but a spiritual oath. This idea created a lineage of devotion that reached across generations, giving identity a depth that time could not erode. In the modern world, the samurai's version of loyalty might seem distant, even impossible. But the essence of it, the idea that identity becomes stronger when anchored to something beyond the self, remains universally relevant. Whether that commitment is to a mission, a craft, a cause, or a principle, loyalty still has the power to clarify, fortify, and elevate a person's life. When you pledge yourself to something with unwavering devotion, you eliminate the noise of conflicting desires. You stand tall not because you never fear, but because you stand for something larger than your own comfort. That, at its heart, is what the samurai understood so well. Loyalty transforms a wandering life into a meaningful one. And in this transformation, a person becomes unshakably themselves. They speak with conviction because their words come from a foundation. Their decisions hold weight because they reflect a deeper purpose. Their actions have power because they are not scattered or indecisive. Loyalty becomes the spine of their identity, the silent force that keeps them upright no matter how violent the world becomes. It is not obedience, nor submission, nor blind devotion. It is the courage to give oneself fully to the one commitment that makes life meaningful. That is why, for the samurai, loyalty was not just a virtue. It was the core of identity, the origin of honor, and the heartbeat of the warrior's soul. Fearless action is not the absence of fear. It is not the illusion of invincibility or the fantasy of a warrior who feels nothing when danger approaches. It is the practiced, disciplined habit of moving forward even when the mind trembles. In Hagakure, Yamamoto Tsunetomo insists that a samurai's worth is measured not by what he feels, but by what he does despite those feelings. Fearless action is a habit, a reflex, a cultivated instinct that becomes so deeply ingrained that hesitation evaporates. It transforms response into commitment, and commitment into character. To live as a warrior, you must train yourself to act with a swiftness that leaves no cracks for fear to grow. The essence of fearless action begins with the understanding that every moment in life is fleeting. Tsunetomo often speaks of the warrior who wastes time weighing outcomes, comparing possibilities, and indulging in the paralysis of overthinking. Such a man is defeated before he takes his first step. The samurai understood that decisions delayed are decisions lost, and decisions avoided are decisions that betray one's purpose. Fearless action is the antidote to this poison of delay. It is the discipline of stepping forward while others step back, of offering your life to the moment instead of retreating into contemplation. The warrior who acts boldly becomes the master of his circumstances, not the victim. Fearless action also requires a certain intimacy with death. One of the most misunderstood teachings of Hagakure is the insistence that a samurai must consider himself already dead. At first, this may sound bleak, even morbid, but the intention is profound. When you remove the fear of losing your life, you remove the greatest source of hesitation. A warrior who has already accepted his own mortality is free to act with a purity that others cannot comprehend. Every task becomes lighter. Every decision becomes clearer. Every obstacle loses its edge. When death no longer intimidates you, nothing else can. And so fearless action emerges not from naive bravado, but from spiritual acceptance. If you're not clinging to life, then you are fully available to live it with intensity. This does not mean reckless impulsiveness. The samurai did not celebrate foolishness. Fearless action is rooted in preparation. The long hours of training, repetition, and mental conditioning that make decisive movement possible. A warrior cannot afford to think in the heat of danger. He must act from instinct honed by discipline. When practice becomes second nature, courage becomes natural. This is why Tsunetomo emphasizes daily drills, relentless self-improvement, and unwavering attention to one's weaknesses. Fearless action is not born from confidence. Confidence is born from preparation. Only those who have trained their mind and body to respond without hesitation can strike with the clarity that fearless action demands. A crucial insight in Hagakure is that fear grows in the space between thought and action. The longer you consider a risky move, the more your imagination creates dramatic consequences, exaggerated dangers, and illusions of failure. The mind becomes a breeding ground for doubt. Tsunetomo teaches that the antidote is immediate movement. The moment you recognize the right action, you must take it before fear has the chance to weave its web. A warrior steps forward not because the path is safe, but because stepping forward is the only honorable answer. This decisiveness becomes a habit. Over time, the muscles, nerves, and spirit become accustomed to responding with boldness. You no longer wait for courage. You act so quickly that courage awakens within action itself. The samurai believe that the greatest enemy of fearless action is hesitation disguised as wisdom. Many people tell themselves they need more time, more information, more certainty. They wait for the perfect moment, not realizing that the perfect moment rarely arrives. And even when it does, hesitation makes them miss it. A warrior cannot afford such luxury. He must learn to trust his judgment, sharpened by discipline, and accept the inherent risk that accompanies every meaningful action. Tsunetomo warns that a person who tries to avoid mistakes through inaction ends up committing the greatest mistake of all, living without courage. Fearless action allows the warrior to move forward, even knowing he may stumble. A stumble taken with boldness is more honorable than a stagnant life lived in fear. Fearless action is also deeply connected to sincerity. Tsunetomo repeatedly teaches that a warrior's actions must come from a place of wholehearted intent. When you act with total sincerity, no hidden motives, no half-hearted attempts, no divided loyalties, your actions become powerful. Fear weakens when the heart is unified. A person who hesitates is a person who is split inside. But when your spirit, intention, and effort align, movement becomes unstoppable. Fearless action is not brave because it ignores fear. It is brave because it unites the self into a single force that fear cannot fracture. True sincerity removes doubt because doubt survives only in divided hearts. This habit of fearless action also shapes how a samurai views failure. In the world of Hagakure, failure is not a disgrace if it comes from genuine effort. A warrior who fails boldly is respected far more than one who avoids failure by inaction. Tsunetomo writes that a person who never fails is likely a person who never tried anything worthy. Fearless action accepts the reality that success is not always guaranteed. But honor is guaranteed when you give your full commitment without retreat. This transforms the way fear is experienced. Failure is no longer a threat. Only cowardice is. The warrior becomes free from the shackles of perfectionism and becomes driven by purpose instead. When you accept that bold failure is more noble than timid success, you act with a kind of purity that cannot be shaken by fear. Another dimension of fearless action is the understanding that the present moment is all a warrior truly possesses. Tsunetomo insists that the past cannot be retrieved and the future cannot be controlled. The only place where a samurai can assert influence is the now. Fear lives in the future, in imagined catastrophes, in potential losses, in hypothetical consequences. But action lives in the present. This is why fearless action becomes a spiritual practice. By dedicating yourself completely to each moment, you prevent your mind from wandering into fear's territory. When you immerse yourself so fully in the task at hand that time itself seems to shrink, fear dissolves. You become the embodiment of presence, and presence is the birthplace of courage. Another powerful insight from Hagakure is that fearless action must be immediate, but must also be repeated. One courageous act is not enough to forge a warrior's character. It is the consistency of courage, the daily repetition of bold choices, that shapes identity. A person who acts bravely once may be admired, but a person who acts bravely every day becomes unshakable. Fearless action becomes a habit through repetition. Every time you resist hesitation, every time you step forward despite uncertainty, every time you choose courage over comfort, you strengthen the internal muscle that drives boldness. Over time, this becomes who you are. You do not become fearless through inspiration. You become fearless through practice. Fearless action also demands humility. A warrior who acts boldly without grounding himself in humility becomes reckless, arrogant, and dangerous. True boldness recognizes that the world is unpredictable, outcomes cannot be guaranteed, and mistakes are inevitable. Humility keeps the warrior grounded, aware, and ready to learn from every experience. It prevents boldness from turning into ego. The samurai understood that arrogance is another form of fear. Fear of admitting limitations, fear of vulnerability, fear of appearing weak. Humility, then, is an essential component of true courage because it frees you from the need to protect your pride. When you no longer cling to ego, your actions become freer, cleaner, and more fearless. In Hagakure, fearless action is also tied to compassion. This may seem paradoxical. How can bold action coexist with empathy? But Tsunetomo explains that fearlessness does not mean coldness. In fact, a compassionate heart makes a person even more courageous. When you act in service of others, when your actions are driven by loyalty, duty, or love, you find a source of courage far stronger than anything self-interest can produce. Fearless action grows when the heart is expanded beyond the boundaries of the self. A person who fights only for himself may waver, but one who fights for something greater becomes unstoppable. A key teaching in Hagakure is that a warrior must be swift in decision and unyielding in resolve. Once action is chosen, it must be followed through completely. Half-hearted action is worse than no action at all, because it exposes the warrior to danger without the benefit of commitment. Fearless action requires a certain mental sharpness. Once you step forward, you do so with total energy. You do not look back, you do not second-guess, you do not retreat inward. This totality of action is what gives samurai courage its unique intensity. The warrior becomes a force of nature, clear, directed, and whole. Even if the outcome is not favorable, the completeness of his action gives him dignity. In modern life, the principle of fearless action remains profoundly relevant. Most people today are imprisoned not by physical danger, but by mental fear, fear of embarrassment, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of uncertainty. These fears corrode ambition, weaken discipline, and shrink potential. Tsunetomo's teaching serves as a reminder that the difference between those who achieve and those who don't often lies not in talent, intelligence, or opportunity, but in boldness. The habit of fearless action is the habit of turning intention into movement, desire into effort, dreams into reality. Those who act boldly shape their world. Those who hesitate are shaped by it. Fearless action also cultivates inner strength. A person who repeatedly chooses courage develops a resilient spirit. They become adaptable, persistent, unbreakable. Challenges do not overwhelm them because they have trained themselves to confront challenges immediately. Setbacks do not discourage them because they understand that bold action is not defined by results, but by commitment. Over time, this discipline creates emotional stability, mental clarity, and a deep sense of personal power. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and start creating it. Perhaps the most profound aspect of fearless action is that it awakens the soul. When you act boldly, you feel alive. You breathe more deeply. Your senses sharpen. Your spirit expands. Life becomes vivid, intense, meaningful. Tsunetomo knew that those who live timidly never experience life's fullness. They remain locked behind invisible barriers, watching possibilities pass by. But a warrior who embraces fearless action tastes life with a richness that others cannot imagine. He engages with the world fully, deeply, and without reservation. And in doing so, he discovers a truth that lies at the heart of Hagakure. Life is not measured by duration, but by intensity. Fearless action is the fire that burns hesitation into ash. It is the discipline that transforms fear into movement. It is the practice that turns uncertainty into opportunity. It is the path through which a person shapes destiny instead of waiting for destiny to shape him. Tsunetomo teaches that the warrior must move with a heart that has already surrendered its fear of loss and a spirit that has already accepted the inevitability of uncertainty. When you live this way, a remarkable thing happens. The world bends in response to your boldness. In the end, the habit of fearless action is not about fearlessness at all. It is about choosing movement over paralysis. It is about rising above hesitation. It is about shaping a life defined by courage, clarity, and intensity. A samurai does not wait for courage to strike. He acts, and courage arrives in response. That is the great lesson of Hagakure. When the heart commits fully, fear dissolves, and action becomes destiny. Honor is not a decoration worn on the chest, nor a poetic word reserved for warriors in ancient tales. It is the invisible spine of a life lived with integrity, the inner flame that guides every choice, every breath, every step. In Hagakure, Yamamoto Tsunetomo describes honor not as a virtue that can be selectively applied, but as an all-consuming way of being. It is total, it is uncompromising, it is clean, meaning free of excuses, deceit, shortcuts, and self-serving rationalizations. To live with honor is to stand naked in front of your own conscience and refuse to lie to yourself. It is to choose the harder path, even when the easier path is tempting, profitable, or safe. A samurai's honor is the compass that points to truth even in darkness, even when the entire world demands surrender. Honor is first and foremost an internal standard. It is the private decision to hold yourself to a level that others may never see or appreciate. A person who lives with clean honor does not act righteously because someone is watching. He acts righteously because he is watching. Tsunetomo believed that the true measure of character is how you behave when you are alone, when there is no applause, no recognition, no reward. If you're only honorable when it is convenient, then you're not honorable at all. Clean honor leaves no room for conditional morality. It demands consistency even when the environment changes, even when life tests you. A person of honor is the same in victory and defeat, the same in prosperity and poverty, the same in public and in private. The world may shift, but his principles do not. To live with uncompromising honor is to accept that your word is sacred. In the world of Hagakure, a promise is not a negotiable agreement. It is a vow that binds the soul. A samurai's word is a contract that cannot be broken without shattering the integrity of his being. Tsunetomo believed that a man without his word is a man without substance, dissolved from the inside like wet paper. Honor means saying what you mean and meaning what you say, even when keeping your promise costs you something valuable. Especially then. The cost is what gives honor its weight. A promise kept only when convenient is merely a transaction. But a promise kept against resistance becomes a demonstration of character. When your word becomes unbreakable, your spirit becomes unshakable. Honor also reveals itself in how you treat others, particularly those who cannot benefit you or those who stand against you. The samurai code insists that courtesy is not politeness but respect, a recognition of shared humanity. To live with clean honor is to refuse to harm others through manipulation, cruelty, or deceit. It is to confront conflict directly, without hiding behind schemes or dishonorable tactics. A samurai meets his opponent face to face, not in the shadows. Honor means you do not lie to gain advantage. You do not betray trust, and you do not act in ways that degrade your dignity or another's. In a world that rewards cunning shortcuts and ruthless tactics, choosing honor is the ultimate rebellion. It is the discipline of kindness without weakness and firmness without cruelty. Honor shapes how you speak, how you fight, how you forgive, and how you lead. But the heart of honor lies in accountability. Tsunetomo teaches that a samurai must take full responsibility for his actions, choices, and mistakes. There is no space for excuses. Excuses are the cracks where integrity leaks away. A warrior owns his failures just as he owns his victories. If he wrongs someone, he apologizes. If he falls short, he admits it without blame or deflection. Accountability is the weightlifting of character. It is painful, heavy, and humbling, but it strengthens the soul. Clean honor means that when you fail your own standard, you confront it immediately without denial. You correct course. You clean your own spirit. Honor is not about never falling. It is about refusing to stay fallen. One of the deepest insights of Hagakure is that true honor must be maintained even when the world does not reward it. Tsunetomo lived during a time when samurai faced an identity crisis. Wars had ended, and many warriors found themselves drifting in peacetime with no external battles to fight. But he argued that the real battle was always internal. When the environment no longer demanded honor, that was precisely when honor mattered most. It is easy to be moral in times of simplicity. It is harder to remain moral when no one cares whether you uphold your values. The warrior understands that honor is not something the world bestows. It is something you create within yourself. A life guided by honor becomes meaningful even in mundane circumstances because each action reflects an inner commitment to excellence. Living with uncompromising honor also requires self-control. The samurai often spoke of one's emotions as wild horses, powerful, necessary, but potentially destructive if left unbridled. Anger, fear, jealousy, greed, pride. These forces can corrupt judgment and lead to dishonor. A warrior trains himself to master his emotions, not suppress them, but direct them. Clean honor arises from clarity. You cannot act honorably if you're clouded by impulsive rage or selfish desire. Tsunetomo instructs warriors to maintain calm even in heated moments so that decisions in the present do not become regrets in the future. Self-control is not weakness. It is discipline. It is the ability to choose integrity over impulse, even when emotions roar. Honor is protected by the calm mind. Another cornerstone of honor is purity of intention. A samurai does not act for applause, recognition, or hidden motives. He acts because it is the right thing to do. This purity makes honor clean. The world is full of people who do good things for the wrong reasons, for validation, for praise, for social advantage. But such actions, though beneficial on the surface, are hollow. They are not anchored in genuine integrity. Tsunetomo believed that sincerity is the soul of honor. If your intentions are clean, your actions will naturally align with morality and loyalty. Purity of intent sharpens your conscience and reveals your path with clarity. When your motives are true, you carry a rare strength that cannot be shaken by judgment or misunderstanding. To live with honor also means guarding your reputation, not in a superficial sense, but in a deep, spiritual way. Reputation is the reflection of your inner state. The samurai believed that people should be able to trust your character simply by hearing your name. If your reputation is strong, others know that your presence brings reliability, steadiness, and truth. But if your name becomes associated with duplicity or inconsistency, you lose the essence of honor. Tsunetomo urges warriors to protect their reputation not through vanity, but through consistent action. Every choice you make, every word you offer, every task you perform contributes to the legacy of your name. Honor means understanding that your identity is built through countless small decisions, each one a stroke in the painting of your life. A crucial lesson from Hagakure is that honor is not merely moral, it is spiritual. It is the connection between your inner truth and the external world. When your behavior mirrors your conscience, you achieve harmony within yourself. Dishonor, on the other hand, creates internal fracture. When your actions contradict your values, your spirit becomes divided. This division breeds anxiety, guilt, and weakness. Clean honor restores unity. It makes the mind sharp, the spirit stable, and the heart peaceful. You feel whole because you know you are living in alignment with your deepest principles. The samurai understood that honor was not a burden, it was liberation. When you commit to honor fully, you are freed from the chaos of moral confusion. There is also a profound connection between honor and loyalty. Tsunetomo repeats that loyalty is the foundation of samurai virtue. Loyalty to one's lord, one's household, one's duties, and one's word. But loyalty without honor becomes blind subservience. Honor without loyalty becomes self-centered moralism. When combined, they create a powerful code that shapes every aspect of life. Living with honor means remaining true to your commitments, standing firm beside those who rely on you, and refusing to abandon responsibility even under pressure. Loyalty enriches honor by giving it direction. Honor enriches loyalty by giving it integrity. Together, they form the backbone of a warrior's existence. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of living with uncompromising honor is recognizing that honor sometimes requires sacrifice. There will be moments when doing the right thing costs you comfort, opportunity, advantage, or even personal safety. Tsunetomo insists that a samurai must never allow fear of loss to corrupt his integrity. Clean honor is not negotiable. It is not traded for convenience. If the choice before you is between gain without honor or loss with honor, a warrior chooses loss. Because what you lose externally is far less than what you lose internally if you betray your principles. Honor demands courage. The courage to stand alone, to be misunderstood, to face consequences. This is why honor is rare. It is more costly than dishonor. But the reward is a life that cannot be blackened by shame. Yet honor is not arrogance. It is not about proving moral superiority. Tsunetomo warns warriors against turning honor into vanity or judgment. True honor is humble. It is a quiet force, not a loud proclamation. A person who constantly insists on his own righteousness is usually masking insecurity. Real honor needs no advertisement. It is felt through presence, not heard through boasting. Humility keeps honor clean by preventing ego from contaminating virtue. When you act honorably without expectation of praise, you demonstrate the deepest form of integrity, the kind that comes from the soul, not the eyes of others. Living with honor also requires forgiveness. not weakness, not foolishness, but the wisdom to release bitterness. A samurai understands that holding grudges clouds judgment and corrupts the spirit. To act with honor, you must remain untainted by resentment. Forgiveness clears the mind and opens the heart to clarity. Tsunetomo does not equate forgiveness with forgetting or allowing harm to continue. Rather, he teaches that emotional purity is essential for honor. A person consumed by hatred cannot act with integrity. Honor requires emotional clarity, which sometimes means letting go of wounds that would otherwise poison your character. Another profound aspect of honor is service. In Hagakure, honor is inseparable from contributing to something greater than yourself. A samurai lives not for personal gratification, but for duty, to family, to clan, to community, to values. When your life is aligned with service, your actions naturally become honorable because they are rooted in responsibility rather than selfishness. Service disciplines the ego and elevates the spirit. When you act for others, your honor becomes a living force that uplifts those around you. You become a source of stability, reliability, and trust. Clean honor radiates outward, influencing the world through quiet strength. Clean honor also shapes how one faces death. Tsunetomo teaches that a samurai must be prepared to die at any moment, not with despair, but with dignity. Honor means that your last breath must be consistent with your entire life. If death arrives unexpectedly, it should find you acting with integrity, loyalty, and courage. This awareness sharpens every moment. You act honorably because you know that every action could be the final one that defines your legacy. This does not breed fear. It breeds seriousness. It breeds commitment. It breeds presence. When you live with uncompromising honor, you are ready for life and ready for death because your conscience is clean. In modern life, honor may seem outdated or overly idealistic, but its relevance has never been greater. The world is filled with shortcuts, temptations, and pressures that steer people away from their values. Many abandon integrity for convenience, reputation for momentary benefit, and principles for approval. But the person who stands firm, who refuses to compromise even when compromise is easy, becomes exceptional. Honor becomes a competitive advantage, not in business alone, but in relationships, in reputation, in mental strength, in self-respect. A person with honor can walk through life with a calm confidence because he does not fear exposure. He is not hiding anything. His soul is transparent, and that transparency becomes power. Living with honor creates internal peace. When you act with integrity, you sleep without worry, speak without calculation, and walk without fear your actions returning to haunt you. Shame cannot attach to you because you have given it no room. Anxiety diminishes because your decisions are rooted in clarity. Confidence grows because you trust yourself. Clean honor is the ultimate form of self-respect, and self-respect is the foundation of emotional strength. In the end, living with clean, uncompromising honor is about alignment, aligning your actions with your values, your words with your truth, your choices with your conscience. It is the quiet, steady courage to be the same person when watched and unwatched, celebrated and criticized, strengthened and tested. It is the discipline of carrying your principles through every circumstance, refusing to let the world dilute your integrity. Tsunetomo teaches that honor is the soul of the warrior, the light that guides every step. When you live with this light, your life gains a depth and dignity that cannot be taken from you. You become a person who stands firm in a world that bends. You become a force of clarity in a world that blurs. You become someone whose existence itself becomes a testament to unwavering truth. Sincerity is one of those rare qualities that sounds simple when you hear it, but turns out to be one of the hardest things a human being can practice. In Hagakure, sincerity isn't a moral decoration or a polite ideal. It's the backbone of character, the core of strength, the thing that separates a hollow life from a meaningful one. For the samurai, sincerity wasn't about appearing honest. It was about living in a way that left no difference between the heart and the action, no gap between intention and expression, no hidden corners where deception could grow. The moment you understand why Tsunetomo insisted on sincerity as a warrior's true strength, you realize that it is also the foundation of every great life, every powerful identity, every person who walks through the world with clarity and dignity. At its deepest level, sincerity is self-alignment. It's when your words match your beliefs, your actions match your values, and your life matches your purpose. Most people talk about honesty as if it's just avoiding lies. But sincerity is far more demanding. It asks you to eliminate the internal lies, the excuses, the pretenses, the artificial performances you put on for the world because you fear judgment. It asks you to stop pretending to be strong in public while feeling weak in private. It asks you to stop saying you value something when your actions betray you. It asks you to stop speaking about dreams you never act on. Sincerity forces you to face yourself completely and without filters. Tsunetomo believed that sincerity creates invincible strength because a person who is fully aligned internally cannot be manipulated, shaken, or controlled. When you have nothing to hide, nothing to mask, nothing false to defend, you become free. You move through life with a kind of quiet power because your actions come from a clear and uncluttered place. There is no confusion about what you want, why you act, or who you are. That clarity is strength. Most people feel weak not because they lack talent or intelligence, but because they are divided inside. They say one thing, feel another, and do a third. A person living in that internal tension is always drained, always uncertain, always insecure. Sincerity resolves that tension and replaces it with a calm, steady, unshakable center. For the samurai, this wasn't just philosophy, it was survival. A warrior whose heart wasn't sincere would hesitate in battle, hesitate in duty, hesitate in loyalty. Hesitation leads to mistakes, mistakes lead to dishonor, and dishonor leads to collapse. Sincerity ensured that a samurai's mind was clean and prepared. A clean heart does not waver. It does not second-guess itself. It does not rewrite its values to suit the situation. It acts with purity, directness, and full commitment. When you strip away all illusion, what remains is focus. That is why Tsunetomo said sincerity was worth more than intelligence, strategy, or even physical strength. A sincere person might not be the most brilliant in the room, but they will always be the most reliable, the most courageous, the most steady. In modern life, sincerity is even more powerful because the world is filled with performance. People curate their personalities like products. They exaggerate, filter, and adjust themselves to gain approval. They chase validation so intensely that their inner voice becomes faint. When you live that way long enough, you lose your sense of who you really are. You start performing your personality instead of living it. You say things you don't believe. You act in ways that don't feel natural. You commit to goals that don't belong to you. And worst of all, you become afraid of being seen as you truly are. That fear is a cage. Sincerity breaks that cage open. Think of someone you trust deeply in your own life. Not someone who is charming or talented, but someone whose presence feels solid. Someone who speaks plainly, acts consistently, and doesn't pretend. Why do you trust them? It's because sincerity creates stability. A sincere person is predictable in the best way. They act in accordance with their values, not their moods or insecurities. You don't have to guess who they are today or what version of themselves they're performing. You don't have to analyze their words for hidden motives. That kind of person becomes a calm point in a chaotic world. They become a source of stability for others, just as a samurai's sincerity was a source of strength for his clan. Tsunetomo also emphasized that sincerity requires humility. Many people think sincerity is about bold honesty, speaking your mind loudly, or refusing to hide your feelings. But true sincerity is quieter and more refined. It isn't aggressive or boastful. It doesn't need to shout. When your heart is clean, you don't feel the need to prove anything, impress anyone, or dominate conversations. You don't use truth as a weapon or honesty as an excuse for cruelty. Sincerity is gentle, respectful, and grounded. When you speak sincerely, people listen, not because you demand attention, but because your words carry weight. They carry the weight of internal alignment, the weight of authenticity, the weight of a heart that isn't pretending. One of the most insightful parts of Hagakure is Tsunetomo's idea that sincerity makes even small actions meaningful. A sincere bow is worth more than an elaborate performance. A sincere promise is worth more than 1,000 enthusiastic declarations. A sincere effort, even if imperfect, has more value than empty perfection. This is because sincerity connects action to intention. When your intention is pure, every action, even a small one, becomes a reflection of your character. People feel that purity. They feel the difference between someone who is genuinely committed and someone who is performing commitment. A sincere life radiates strength in every gesture, every word, every decision. But sincerity requires courage. And this is where many people struggle. It is easier to pretend than to be real. It is easier to say what people want to hear than to say what you genuinely believe. It is easier to act confident than to admit you are still learning. It is easier to impress strangers than to build true character. Sincerity removes the masks, and that can feel vulnerable. But vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is strength disguised. The samurai understood that sincerity exposes your true self, but only a strong person is willing to be fully seen. Weakness hides. Strength stands in the open. When you start living sincerely, something remarkable happens. Your relationships transform. People around you begin to trust you more deeply. They open up to you because sincerity is contagious. Your presence becomes calming rather than competitive. You draw the right people into your life, those who value authenticity over pretense. And you naturally repel people who thrive on manipulation or superficiality. The samurai saw sincerity as a purification of life. The more sincere you become, the clearer your path gets. The clearer your path gets, the easier it becomes to walk with confidence. Sincerity also sharpens decision-making. When you're aligned internally, choices become simpler. You don't need endless debates inside your mind. You don't need to twist yourself into mental knots trying to predict outcomes. You don't need to negotiate with your own doubts. Instead, you recognize what is right and you act. This directness is powerful. It frees you from indecision, and indecision is the biggest thief of time, energy, and clarity. When you learn to be sincere, you learn to make choices without hesitation because those choices come from your authentic core, not from fear or external pressure. Perhaps the most profound aspect of sincerity in Hagakure is that it leads to inner peace. When you live with sincerity, you stop carrying the weight of falseness. You stop worrying about maintaining an image. You stop fearing the exposure of your flaws. You stop hiding your true self behind layers of performance. You simply exist as you are, fully and honestly. And that kind of existence feels liberating. It feels clean. It feels calm. The samurai believed this inner peace was essential for clarity and courage. A mind burdened by deception is always anxious. A sincere mind is free. To live with sincerity today means speaking plainly, acting deliberately, honoring commitments, and refusing to betray your own values even when it's inconvenient. It means letting people see your real intentions. It means telling the truth even when it costs you. It means being the same person in public and private. It means choosing integrity over popularity. It means living without internal contradictions. You don't need a sword to live like a samurai. You need sincerity, because sincerity is the quiet strength beneath every great character. It is the root from which loyalty, discipline, courage, and honor grow. Without sincerity, everything else collapses. With sincerity, everything else becomes possible. And when you embrace this truth fully, you understand why Tsunetomo wrote with such conviction. He wasn't trying to build perfect warriors. He was trying to build whole human beings, people whose strength came not from outward power, but from an inner purity so steady, so calm, and so deeply real that it could not be broken. That is why sincerity is true strength. Humility is often misunderstood as softness, weakness, or lowering yourself in front of others. But in Hagakure, humility is the opposite. For the samurai, humility was the sign of a person who had mastered himself. It was the quiet strength that came after a long inner battle, the battle against ego, pride, impulsiveness, and the illusions of superiority. Humility wasn't about acting small. It was about becoming immovable. It was the inner calm that let a warrior walk into chaos without losing himself, speak with gentleness without losing authority, and serve with devotion without feeling lesser. This is the kind of humility that turns a person into a pillar, unshaken, grounded, and steady. Yamamoto Tsunetomo believed that the greatest war a samurai ever fought was not with an external enemy, but with the ego inside his own heart. Ego makes a person unstable. When your pride controls you, you react wildly to insults, become defensive under criticism, and feel threatened by someone else's success. Ego makes you fragile. It convinces you that your value is tied to how others perceive you. That fragility is dangerous. A samurai who acted from ego would make reckless decisions, pick unnecessary fights, and lose clarity at the moment he needed it most. Humility dissolved that fragility. It allowed a warrior to observe, adapt, and respond from a grounded state, instead of reacting emotionally. A humble warrior was dangerous not because he was loud, but because he was calm. Inner calm is the heart of humility. It's the state you reach when your self-worth no longer depends on external validation, when you don't need to prove yourself, when you don't need to win every argument or dominate every room, when you don't crumble under criticism or inflate under praise. In this calmness, you stop living as a slave to your ego and begin living with clarity. This calmness creates power. You move through life like a mountain, steady, silent, but immovable in strength. People feel safe around a calm person. They trust them. They follow them. Because calmness radiates control, stability, and wisdom in a world that is constantly chaotic. Tsunetomo wrote that humility allows a samurai to learn endlessly. A proud mind closes itself. A humble mind remains open. Every moment becomes a lesson. Every person becomes a teacher. Every mistake becomes a stepping stone. When pride takes over, growth stops. Pride says, I already know enough. Humility says, there's always more to learn. That simple shift changes everything. A humble warrior becomes intelligent not because he was born that way, but because he never stops learning. He listens more than he speaks. He observes more than he interrupts. He improves rather than defends. This is why humility produces mastery. The humble grow faster than the proud. But humility doesn't mean passivity. That's a misunderstanding created by people who only see humility on the surface. True humility comes from strength, not fear. Weakness hides itself. Weakness pretends to be humble by shrinking. Strength stands tall, but chooses not to boast. A humble samurai didn't deny his skill. He simply didn't attach his identity to it. He didn't use his abilities to dominate others. He didn't feel the need to prove superiority. Instead, he channeled his strength into service. Service to his lord, to his clan, to his duty, and to his principles. This act of service wasn't subordination, it was purpose. Humility gave direction to strength. Without humility, strength becomes wild. With humility, strength becomes noble. Inner calm was the expression of that nobility. A samurai's calmness in the face of fear, loss, or insult came from spiritual stability. They trained not only their bodies, but also their minds. They understood that fear is amplified by ego. When your ego tells you that you must protect your image at all costs, fear grows. Fear of embarrassment, fear of defeat, fear of looking weak, fear of losing status. These fears cloud the mind. But when humility removes the ego, fear loses its grip. A calm warrior can look at danger without illusion. He can see the truth of a situation rather than reacting to imaginary threats created by pride. Imagine facing a stressful situation today, a harsh comment, a mistake in public, a sudden challenge. Most people panic because their ego feels attacked. They react impulsively, emotionally, and defensively. But a person who has cultivated humility and inner calm pauses. He breathes. He observes the situation instead of collapsing into it. That pause is power. It allows you to respond intelligently rather than emotionally. It prevents regret. It creates a sense of presence that others instinctively respect. This is the calmness Tsunetomo admired, a mind that remains still even when the world around it becomes loud. Another beautiful aspect of humility in Hagakure is the idea that a samurai should always see himself as a student of life. No matter how skilled, experienced, or respected he becomes, there's always room to improve. This attitude doesn't diminish confidence, it strengthens it. A humble person is confident because he doesn't fear acknowledging gaps in his knowledge. He knows he can learn. He knows he can adapt. He knows he can grow. Pride pretends to know everything and collapses when challenged. Humility embraces not knowing and becomes unstoppable. Tsunetomo also emphasized that humility protects relationships. Ego destroys connections because ego wants to win, to dominate, to be right at any cost. But humility seeks harmony. It allows you to apologize without feeling defeated, to forgive without feeling superior, to listen without feeling threatened. Humility makes communication smoother, friendships deeper, and partnerships stronger. A humble person doesn't compete with loved ones. He creates space for them to shine. That kind of presence is rare, and people gravitate toward it naturally. Inner calm also teaches patience. A samurai had to endure long periods of waiting, uncertainty, and silence. Without humility, waiting breeds frustration. The ego hates patience because it wants everything now. But humility allows you to move through time without agitation. It teaches you that growth isn't always visible, progress isn't always immediate, and mastery isn't rushed. Humility recognizes that the deeper roots grow unseen. The calm warrior trusts the process. He doesn't rush destiny or resist timing. He walks his path steadily, confidently, and without restlessness. One of the most powerful outcomes of humility is emotional control. A humble person doesn't get swept away by praise or crushed by criticism. Praise becomes a pleasant breeze, not a drug. Criticism becomes feedback, not an attack. This emotional steadiness is the heart of inner calm. When you no longer depend on external opinions, you gain control over your inner world. You decide your reactions. You decide what matters. You decide how to interpret events. That level of control is rare, and it is the kind of control that made samurai unshakable. Humility also keeps ambition pure. Ambition without humility turns into greed and arrogance. But ambition with humility becomes service, purpose, and contribution. A humble samurai didn't seek greatness for personal glory. He sought it so he could serve better. This made his ambitions powerful because they were rooted in sincerity, not ego. In your own life, humility transforms ambition into something sustainable. It prevents burnout. It protects mental clarity. It ensures that every step you take aligns with your deeper values instead of superficial validation. At its highest level, humility gives you spiritual strength. When you drop ego, remove masks, and accept your imperfections, you connect to something deeper than identity. You connect to truth. You see yourself honestly. You see others honestly. You see life without distortion. This honesty creates inner peace. That peace nourishes every part of your life. It makes you resilient, wise, grounded, and compassionate without losing strength. Tsunetomo believed humility was the mark of a true warrior, not because it made him gentle, but because it made him complete. A warrior who lacked humility could be skilled but unstable. A warrior who embodied humility was unbreakable. To live with humility today is to walk through the world with silent confidence. It is to know your worth without shouting it. It is to stand firm without aggression. It is to listen deeply, act thoughtfully, and move peacefully. It is to carry strength without showing off, wisdom without arrogance, clarity without judgment. It is to develop a mind that remains calm no matter the storm. A person who cultivates humility doesn't fear losing status or image because his value comes from within. He doesn't get lost in noise because he has found his inner stillness. Humility is the hidden armor of the strong. Inner calm is the silent weapon of the wise. Together, they form the spiritual foundation of a warrior who cannot be shaken. That is why humility and inner calm are not just samurai virtues, they're life virtues. When you master them, you stop reacting to the world and start guiding your own life with clarity, intention, and unshakable strength. Swift, decisive choice is one of the hallmarks of a true samurai. And in Hagakure, Yamamoto Tsunetomo emphasizes it as the distinguishing factor between hesitation and mastery, between doubt and honor, between life wasted and life fulfilled. The essence of a decisive choice is not speed for its own sake, nor reckless impulsiveness. It is clarity born of preparation, conviction, and alignment with one's principles. The samurai understood that life unfolds in moments that demand immediate action. When the instant comes, hesitation is often the difference between success and failure, between survival and regret, between a life of purpose and one of wasted potential. To act decisively is to act in harmony with truth, to let your inner values dictate action without delay or doubt. The power of swift decision comes from a mind trained in discipline and awareness. Tsunetomo teaches that indecision is the enemy of honor. Every moment spent wavering is a moment wasted, a moment in which opportunity slips through the fingers and danger grows stronger. The samurai cultivated the ability to assess, understand, and act quickly because the battlefield, like life, waits for no one. But decisive action is not blind. It is grounded in preparation. The samurai spent years mastering skills, internalizing principles, and understanding consequences. When a moment arrived, the decision was no longer a choice, but a natural response, an extension of a life already aligned with clarity and purpose. This is why swift choice is powerful. It is the external manifestation of internal mastery. Hesitation, in contrast, is corrosive. It stems from doubt, fear, and overthinking, often paralyzing even the most capable individuals. A hesitant mind allows the world to dictate action rather than principles. Tsunetomo warns that hesitation creates regret because opportunities do not wait, crises do not pause, and life does not rewind. A samurai who hesitates is caught in the liminal space between knowledge and action, a space where indecision breeds weakness, and weakness attracts misfortune. Decisive action breaks that limbo. It transforms uncertainty into momentum. It turns potential energy into kinetic force. In this way, the samurai's ability to decide swiftly was not just a skill, but a spiritual discipline. The roots of decisive choice lie in self-knowledge. A person cannot act instantly if he does not know what he stands for, what he values, and what he fears. Tsunetomo repeatedly emphasizes that clarity of purpose is essential. When the inner compass is aligned, the outer actions follow naturally. Every choice becomes an extension of your inner truth. A samurai did not deliberate endlessly over every strike or every word because he knew the principles guiding him. He had internalized loyalty, honor, courage, and sincerity. With such grounding, the decision was already made long before the moment arrived. It only required the body and mind to enact it. This is why decisive choice is a mark of mastery. It reflects alignment between internal principle and external action. Timing is inseparable from decisiveness. A delayed choice can make even the right decision catastrophic. The samurai understood that moments are fleeting and that life often presents only a single chance to act. Tsunetomo teaches that when a critical moment appears, the proper response is immediate. This does not mean acting recklessly or without thought. Rather, it means that preparation has already reduced doubt to near zero. A decisive person trusts his knowledge, his training, and his principles, and moves without hesitation. Swift action carries confidence because it is the culmination of foresight, preparation, and clarity. It transforms uncertainty into power. Fear is the enemy of swift action, but the samurai transformed fear into a tool for clarity. Awareness of danger heightened alertness and refined instinct. Tsunetomo argues that understanding the inevitability of death and the fleeting nature of life removes the illusion of endless second chances. When a warrior accepts mortality, the paralysis of hesitation dissolves. The mind becomes sharp, the hand becomes steady, the body becomes ready. This understanding creates the mental environment in which decisive choice thrives. A fearless mind is not one without caution. It is one in which fear does not obstruct action, but sharpens it. Decisive choice also requires courage to accept consequences. Every decision carries risk. Every action has potential fallout. Tsunetomo teaches that a samurai does not flee responsibility. He acts and accepts the results, whether favorable or adverse. This willingness to bear the weight of one's choices strengthens character and reinforces the habit of swift action. A mind that fears responsibility hesitates. A mind that embraces it moves. This is why decisive action is inseparable from honor. It is a reflection of integrity under pressure. Choosing swiftly is not just about effectiveness. It is about living authentically in accordance with principle, even when the stakes are high. In modern life, the lessons of swift, decisive choice are strikingly relevant. People often delay important decisions due to overanalysis, fear of judgment, or obsession with perfection. Opportunities pass. Relationships stagnate. Careers stall. Health declines. The samurai's philosophy reminds us that preparation, alignment, and principle allow us to act swiftly without recklessness. Decisiveness is cultivated by knowledge, self-awareness, and practice, not by chance. It is a discipline that transforms hesitation into confidence and inaction into purposeful motion. A decisive mind also simplifies life. Constant deliberation creates mental clutter. Constant hesitation breeds stress. Decisive choice reduces complexity by creating clarity. Each action moves life forward. Each decision, once made, releases mental energy from doubt and regret. Tsunetomo understood that the most effective warriors did not waste time questioning every possibility. They acted, observed the results, and adapted if necessary. This fluidity is not impulsivity. It is informed decisiveness. It allows a person to maintain momentum, preserve focus, and maximize opportunity. Another subtle aspect of swift choice is the cultivation of instinct. Tsunetomo describes instinct as the culmination of rigorous training, observation, and principle. A samurai develops an intuition that guides immediate action without requiring lengthy deliberation. This instinctive clarity is refined over years of disciplined study and practice, and it allows decisions to be made in the heat of crisis with precision. The power of instinctive decisiveness is that it bypasses hesitation while remaining aligned with values, maintaining both speed and integrity. Training the mind to trust instinct becomes a way to act decisively even under immense pressure. Finally, decisive choice builds confidence and reinforces character. Every action taken strengthens trust in oneself. Every moment in which hesitation is overcome becomes evidence that one can rely on his judgment. This confidence becomes self-reinforcing. The more you act decisively, the more clarity and courage you gain for future decisions. Tsunetomo emphasizes that this cycle of decisive action and confidence is what separates a true samurai from one who falters, a person who thrives from one who is lost. Decisiveness is not a single act. It is a habit of alignment, courage, clarity, and integrity that compounds over a lifetime. In the end, the power of swift, decisive choice is a reflection of mastery over self, mastery over fear, and mastery over principle. It is the culmination of clarity, preparation, courage, and alignment. A decisive action executed in harmony with one's values is both an expression of freedom and a demonstration of strength. Tsunetomo teaches that the ability to act immediately when the moment demands it is not just a martial skill. It is a life skill, a spiritual discipline, and a mark of a person who has trained not only his body but also his mind and soul. When you cultivate the habit of swift, decisive choice, you transform hesitation into action, fear into clarity, and life into a series of moments fully lived, fully aligned, and fully honorable. Purpose is not an abstract idea reserved for lofty speeches or philosophical debates. It is a lived experience, a daily rhythm that structures every action, thought, and decision. In Hagakure, Yamamoto Tsunetomo emphasizes that a samurai's life was defined by purpose, not as a distant goal, but as a practice woven into each day. Purpose was not something to be discovered once and stored like a treasure. It was something to be enacted continuously, moment by moment, in every choice and duty. To live with purpose daily is to transform mundane tasks into acts of meaning, to see every interaction as an opportunity to express your principles, and to align your inner values with external action. The samurai did not live passively. He lived intentionally, and that intention made his life unshakably coherent, resilient, and meaningful. Daily purpose begins with clarity of principle. Tsunetomo teaches that a warrior must understand his core values: loyalty, honor, courage, sincerity, and allow them to guide every decision. Without such clarity, life becomes reactive, filled with distractions, whims, and external pressures. Purpose acts as a compass, directing attention and effort toward what truly matters. When your internal compass is aligned, even small daily actions gain significance. Cleaning your armor, speaking to a comrade, or performing a ritual, all can become expressions of principle when approached with deliberate intention. Purpose transforms repetition into ritual, labor into devotion, and life into an ongoing practice of meaning. Acting with purpose requires consistency. Tsunetomo emphasizes that virtue is not realized in grand gestures alone, but in the daily discipline of adhering to principles, even in seemingly trivial moments. A samurai's honor was reinforced every morning he rose, every sword he polished, every lesson he reviewed, and every duty he fulfilled. Purpose, therefore, is a practice, not a concept. It demands attention, mindfulness, and persistence. When you embed purpose into the rhythm of your day, you create a life in which every moment contributes to your growth, your integrity, and your mastery. The mundane becomes sacred, and the ordinary becomes extraordinary because each act reflects your alignment with values. A central aspect of daily purpose is presence. Purpose cannot be achieved by dwelling in the past or obsessing over the future. It is enacted in the now. The samurai understood that meaningful action arises from focused attention. When chopping wood, practicing martial skills, or serving a lord, a warrior immersed himself fully in the task, without distraction or divided intention. This total presence is what converts ordinary deeds into purposeful ones. Tsunetomo stresses that every action performed with awareness strengthens the mind, sharpens judgment, and builds character. Purpose is realized not in abstraction, but in the disciplined engagement with each passing moment. Purpose also integrates personal accountability. Tsunetomo teaches that a samurai must take full responsibility for his actions, aligning them with his values regardless of outcome. Purposeful living requires honesty with oneself about intentions, motivations, and effort. A warrior cannot claim purpose while avoiding responsibility, making excuses, or acting inconsistently. Every day offers opportunities to test your commitment to your values, to speak truthfully, act courageously, honor obligations, and maintain integrity. This accountability reinforces alignment and turns intention into tangible practice. Purpose is not simply declared. It is lived, tested, and refined daily. Another dimension of purpose is service. Tsunetomo repeatedly connects personal virtue with contribution to others. A samurai's daily life was inseparable from duties to his lord, clan, and community. Purpose, therefore, is outward-facing as well as inward-facing. When daily actions serve a greater good, they acquire lasting meaning. Whether through mentorship, protection, or honest work, the samurai's purpose was enacted through service. For modern life, this principle holds equally true. Purpose finds its fullest expression when our daily deeds positively impact others, when our work extends beyond self-interest, and when our presence adds value to the lives of those around us. Purpose without contribution is shallow. Purpose with service becomes transformative. Preparation and reflection are essential tools for sustaining purpose daily. Tsunetomo highlights that a disciplined warrior engages in continual self-examination, reviewing actions, assessing alignment with values, and adjusting behaviors as needed. Daily purpose requires this feedback loop. Without reflection, one drifts into autopilot, allowing life to be dictated by habits, distractions, or external pressures rather than internal principle. By beginning and ending the day with conscious reflection, considering what was done well, what fell short, and how to improve, the samurai cultivated a living purpose, turning ordinary existence into intentional mastery. Purpose also demands courage, because living intentionally often requires confronting discomfort. The samurai faced physical danger, social scrutiny, and moral dilemmas daily. Acting with purpose meant choosing the right course over the easy one, upholding duty over convenience, and maintaining integrity even when it was costly. Modern individuals experience analogous challenges, difficult conversations, ethical decisions, or opportunities that require personal sacrifice. Daily purpose manifests in the courage to act correctly despite risk, criticism, or uncertainty. Each courageous decision reinforces alignment and strengthens character, making purpose not abstract, but a practiced habit of brave living. Tsunetomo further teaches that purpose is amplified by mindfulness of mortality. The awareness of life's fleeting nature sharpens focus, clarifies priorities, and fuels the urgency to act with meaning. For a samurai, understanding that death could come at any moment created a profound motivation to live purposefully. It eliminated trivial distractions and reinforced attention on what truly mattered: loyalty, honor, mastery, and meaningful contribution. This urgency converts daily practice into a sacred rhythm, a constant reminder that each moment carries weight and significance. Life becomes a series of deliberate choices rather than a random drift. Consistency, courage, presence, accountability, and reflection combine to make purpose a daily practice, not a distant aspiration. Tsunetomo emphasizes that a samurai's life was meaningful not because of grandiose achievements alone, but because each day was lived intentionally, with repeated affirmation of principle through action. Purpose, therefore, is a muscle to be exercised daily. Every task, interaction, and decision is an opportunity to strengthen it. Over time, the habitual enactment of purpose shapes character, creates clarity, and transforms life into a coherent narrative of integrity and meaning. In modern application, daily purpose can manifest in countless ways. Starting the day with intention, committing fully to work, maintaining honesty in small interactions, prioritizing tasks that reflect core values, and seeking growth and contribution in each moment. Purpose is the thread that ties together seemingly disparate actions into a coherent whole, converting chaos into direction, confusion into clarity, and monotony into meaningful rhythm. The samurai's lesson is timeless. A life aligned with principle is not accidental. It is deliberate, practiced, and consciously enacted every day. Ultimately, Living with purpose as a daily practice is an active alignment between inner values and outer action. It transforms life into a continuous demonstration of integrity, courage, and devotion. By embedding purpose into each moment, you cultivate a life of clarity, resilience, and deep satisfaction. Tsunetomo's vision was not of a one-time awakening, but of a continual, intentional engagement with life. Daily purpose is not a destination. It is the journey itself, the disciplined, mindful, and courageous practice that turns ordinary existence into a legacy of meaningful action. Building a life of unshakable resolve is the culmination of all the samurai virtues Yamamoto Tsunetomo details in Hagakure. Resolve is not an innate trait. It is a cultivated force, a product of repeated discipline, clarity of purpose, and unwavering alignment with one's principles. For the samurai, resolve was the silent engine behind every action, the inner steel that allowed a warrior to stand firm in the face of adversity, fear, or uncertainty. It was not a flash of courage in a single moment, but the accumulation of countless small decisions, daily practices, and moral steadfastness that produced a mind impervious to distraction and doubt. At the foundation of unshakable resolve is clarity of purpose. A person cannot remain resolute if they do not know what they are defending, striving for, or committed to. Tsunetomo stresses that a samurai must internalize his principles so deeply that they dictate action automatically. When the heart is aligned with values, hesitation fades because decisions no longer rely on external circumstances. They flow naturally from the internal compass. Resolve is therefore not simply determination in the moment. It is the manifestation of a life lived in alignment with truth, honor, and duty, repeated every day until it becomes instinctive. Discipline is the second pillar of resolve. The samurai trained not only in martial skills, but in the habit of self-mastery. Discipline strengthens the mind to act in accordance with principle even when desire, fear, or convenience pull in another direction. Tsunetomo emphasizes that small, repeated acts of self-control, polishing armor, practicing skills, maintaining rituals, accumulate into unshakable strength. In modern life, this translates into consistency in habits, ethical behavior, and commitment to growth. A person who cultivates discipline develops a mind that resists distraction, withstands temptation, and remains steadfast under pressure. Another key aspect of resolve is the ability to face fear directly. Tsunetomo teaches that awareness and acceptance of mortality liberate the mind from paralysis. The samurai did not seek death recklessly, but they did not fear it either. By confronting the inevitability of loss, pain, and death, a warrior develops mental resilience. Fear loses its grip when acknowledged and understood, leaving the mind free to act decisively and with integrity. This principle applies beyond the battlefield. When we confront uncomfortable truths, risks, or personal limitations head-on, our mental and emotional fortitude grows, forging a mind capable of sustaining unshakable resolve. Sincerity and honesty with oneself reinforce resolve. Tsunetomo notes that inner contradictions weaken the warrior. A person who lies to themselves, hides from their flaws, or acts inconsistently will falter under pressure. Resolve emerges when the mind and heart are fully aligned, when one's internal beliefs, intentions, and actions converge. This alignment creates a mental state in which distractions, doubts, and external pressures are less likely to derail action. A resolute life is a life without internal betrayal. Humility is another critical component. Contrary to common belief, humility does not weaken resolve, it strengthens it. By acknowledging limitations and embracing continuous learning, a samurai remained flexible and adaptable, able to respond effectively to unforeseen circumstances. Humility prevents rigidity, allowing a person to maintain their core principles while adjusting tactics and strategies to meet challenges. In essence, humility stabilizes resolve by preventing ego-driven impulsiveness and preserving clarity in action. Courage reinforces resolve because action requires bravery. Tsunetomo emphasizes that a samurai's strength is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Courage allows a person to act decisively in alignment with principle even when danger, criticism, or hardship looms. A life built on courage transforms resolve from theoretical strength into practical, observable power. It is courage that enables a person to uphold their commitments, confront challenges, and maintain integrity, even when circumstances are adverse. Preparation and foresight are equally essential. The samurai cultivated resolve through constant readiness, physical, mental, and emotional. Tsunetomo stresses that unpreparedness breeds hesitation and doubt. Resolve thrives in a mind that has anticipated difficulties, rehearsed responses, and trained for endurance. Preparation does not remove risk, but it allows the mind to confront risk without panic. It creates a foundation from which action becomes natural, automatic, and decisive. Consistency in small acts is the final ingredient of unshakable resolve. Tsunetomo teaches that character is built gradually, not in singular heroic gestures. Every day, a warrior chooses honesty, loyalty, courage, discipline, and purpose. He reinforces the mental and moral infrastructure of his life. Over time, these repeated choices accumulate into a force that is both psychological and spiritual, a personal gravity that holds the individual steady through storms. The ordinary choices matter because they compound into extraordinary resilience. In practical modern application, building a life of unshakable resolve involves daily integration of these principles, aligning actions with values, cultivating discipline, facing fear, practicing sincerity, embracing humility, exercising courage, preparing diligently, and committing consistently to daily practices that reinforce integrity. Each small act becomes a reinforcement of strength. Each challenge met without compromise adds to the mental architecture of resolve. Over time, resolve becomes a habit, a reflex, a core aspect of identity rather than a situational response. Ultimately, unshakable resolve is the culmination of internal mastery. It is the inner steel forged by principle, discipline, courage, humility, and consistency. Tsunetomo illustrates that such resolve is not merely about personal survival or success. It is about living a life that is coherent, purposeful, and honorable. A person with unshakable resolve navigates life with clarity, stands firm in adversity, and acts with confidence and integrity in every sphere of existence. It is the silent power that sustains a samurai in battle, a leader in crisis, and a human being through the unpredictable currents of life. A life of unshakable resolve is not built overnight. It is constructed moment by moment, decision by decision, act by act. Tsunetomo's wisdom teaches that the true strength of a person lies not in temporary victories, fleeting bravery, or external accolades, but in the consistent, principled cultivation of inner power that allows a life to remain steady, purposeful, and honorable regardless of circumstance. When resolve becomes embedded in identity, it transforms life into a disciplined, courageous, and meaningful journey, impervious to the storms of fortune, fear, and doubt. If you found these samurai lessons inspiring, hit that like button and share this wisdom with others. Don't forget to subscribe to the Book Digest for more life-changing book summaries and timeless insights. Click the bell icon so you never miss a video, and join our community of curious minds on the path to mastery. Your journey to knowledge starts here. Subscribe now